Welcome, everyone. This is the League of Women Voters Voter Service Training. This is specifically about what has changed in election code since the lame duck session. The legislature updated some codes. This is the broadest, most sweeping set of changes to how voters can access the ballot or register to vote since the 2004 election. There were lawsuits after the 2004 election that created some settlements. Those were brought by ACLU, NAACP, League, and others. The difference are a lot of these changes will make voting more difficult for voters. So this training is specifically for our local leagues, our partners, anyone who directly assists voters in the field. But keep in mind, we will be doing a lot more training and really digging into the best way to assist diverse sets of voters, like students or those who are incarcerated, our unhoused Ohio neighbors. But at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Nazik Hapasha, who works closely with all of our local leagues, a lot of our partners who do direct work with voters, and she has been poring over these changes to the election code to demystify them for all of you.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Here is an overview of what we're going to be covering today. So the new laws that were changed, they cover a lot of things that happen before Election Day, after Election Day in regards to voting and other things in the election process. But today we are going to be focusing on making sure that voters know how to cast their ballot with confidence and most efficiently as possible for them. And in the future, we will be having more trainings on other parts of the election process that has changed. So first, a little bit about how we got here, because that's important to know in terms of some of the discrepancies and lack of clarity that we're seeing. If you followed any voting or elections legislation throughout the 134th General Assembly the last 2 years, you would have seen that there was actually a great push to introduce and pass voting legislation in some way, shape, or form. And there was many different attempts to do this. They looked like different things. But what we saw, unfortunately, was that this work was pushed into the lame duck session. So the last month and a half of the General Assembly, where there was a push to put different elements of different bills into one law, which unfortunately, there just wasn't enough work done so that voter advocates and different stakeholders could be allowed to voice their concerns and their input over how these laws are actually administered and what the voting and election process is like. And so what we saw is that by the time Governor DeWine signed this bill, it actually caused for, and even the timing of when he signed this bill actually resulted in a lot of confusion and lack of clarity. So while we have a lot of information, we still are missing some answers to our questions. And so we'll talk about some of the things that are not clear, what are the things that we're still looking out for, but just know that we are still very much in the middle of the rulemaking process in terms of knowing how exactly these new laws are going to be administered. So the first thing that we need to know is that these laws apply at the start of the primary election season. And so that is May 2nd. If you have a primary election in your area, not every county, not every city or township does, but for those that do, this law technically goes into effect on April 7th, but is actually going to be applied earlier as soon as the UOCAVA and early voting season starts. So for military and overseas voters, if there are any changes that apply to them in terms of needing to update their registration, early voting, which will actually start a few days before this law is supposed to go into effect, these laws, almost all of them, take effect prior to April 7th. They take effect as soon as the early voting season starts. Unless otherwise noted, all these laws take effect early. Where they don't, I'll mention when we get there. So we will start first with voter registration. There are some changes to voter registration where you can only now register with an Ohio driver's license number or state ID, or the last 4 digits of your social security number. Please note that the voter registration form does mention that it is preferable to use a license number or a state ID number to register to vote. And that if you don't have that, you can use the last 4 digits of your social security number. This is a continuing thing, although many people, because they're now going over these forms more closely, are just starting to notice it. This is a continuing issue. We don't expect that there's going to be any issues if somebody registers with their social security number, but just know that that's what the form states. And when you, as a voter advocate or voter service person, are doing this in the field, that should be your direction to people to register with their license or state ID number. And then if they don't have that, they can use their social security number. If you have old forms, while we have heard from some boards of elections that they might take them, please know that you should call your BOE first if you have old forms that you would like to turn in. It's one of the areas where there's currently different guidance from different places. But most importantly, I will tell you, if you have old forms, please don't leave them lying around in public places. It is always going to be the preference that you use the new forms, which should be available from your Board of Elections website, from your Board of Elections office, as well as from their website, but go get printed forms from the Board of Elections office. It is preferable. But do not leave forms lying around, old forms especially lying around public places, because people will not know what the new laws, what the requirements for them are. I have noticed as of yesterday that there are on different BOEs and on the Secretary of State's website itself, that there are links in different places to voter registration forms, and some of them are old and some of them are new. Today's February 20th. And so again, as of yesterday, not all the links have been updated. And that's why I say you should go into the office and get new forms.
From your Board of Elections.
From
but
your
how,
board.
Nazik, do you tell if you have old forms or new forms? Because really, one thing that's very important is that the fields have not changed, but the ID requirements have changed. And so you'll show us how we can tell, right?
So this is what you're going to look for to make sure that you know you have a new form, whether you get it from the BOE office or you print it out online. These are the things that you're looking for. First, on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to look at identification requirements. In the previous, this is a new form that I have taken a screenshot of here. And it only says that you can use a driver's license or state ID or the last 4 digits of your social security card. The previous form mentions other forms of ID like a utility bill or a phone bill. That is no longer the case, and you should make sure that that's not on any forms that you have. And then on the back of your voter registration form, you'll notice also where it says Ohio voter identification requirements. It will tell you the new requirements to vote in person, that a person must have a photo ID at the polls in order to vote. So those are the things you're looking for in order to make sure that you have an updated voter registration form.
Great. And Nazik, let's talk about highlighting the form. A lot of boards of elections and the Secretary of State actually has the required fields highlighted, but sometimes you may not have those required fields highlighted. So you use a yellow highlighter, right? And one thing is that the Board of Elections or Secretary of State form may not have phone number highlighted because it's technically not required. We encourage you, even if they're pre-highlighted forms, to highlight phone number too. And that's because if there's a problem, this enables the Board of Elections to contact that voter more efficiently. If they don't have a phone number, everything they do in terms of correspondence has to be by snail mail. So for example, if someone casts a provisional ballot or there's some confusion about their voter registration form, having that phone number means a friendly worker from the Board of Elections can give the voter a call directly and try to get that remedied.
Yeah, exactly, Jen. And so that's exactly it. You're most likely going to get highlighted forms from your Board of Elections, but if you don't, you're going to look to highlight all of the fields, even the voluntary ones, so that boards of elections can get in touch with people if they need to. We're mostly covering new laws here, but I just want to mention a few best practices reminder. Make sure that before someone walks away from you after they give you a voter registration form, just tell them, hey, hold on a minute, let me just make sure I've got everything I need here, and make sure that one, they have filled out all of the spaces, and two, that they have done so correctly. So here are some of the common things that we look for. At the top, before number one, where it says I am, make sure that they check that off. The box where questions number 1 and 2 are, those are often missed, and it is required for you to fill those out. And then the other thing that we often see, well, two things actually, is that where it says birth date, and date, people often mix that up. Sometimes they will put today's date where the birth date is, and it is required to put your birth date. And then where county is for number 8, sometimes people see the word country instead of county. And so just make sure, again, go over the whole thing, but these are some of the mistakes that we see sometimes in the field.
And also keep in mind that if you have a voter who can't write well, you can stand there with them and help them fill out all the pieces, but they need to sign.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you, Jen. I've gotten a lot of questions as to whether the eligibility laws have changed. There are no changes in who is eligible for voter registration. And so it's the same thing as outlined here on this slide to be able to register to vote. So let's talk about photo ID, because that's one of the most major things that have changed in this law. On this slide, you will see the definition of a photo ID. And so that is mainly 3 things. It is 1, an unexpired ID from the Ohio BMV. And so that covers a number of things. It covers driver's license, ID cards, interim cards, different kinds of driver's license, even if they are restricted or temporary or suspended. A note on suspended ID driver's license, which we know, we've heard recently in the news that that's a major problem in Ohio. If you have a driver's license that is suspended, but it is still in your possession, you can use that to vote as long as it is not expired. If it has been taken away from you for some reason, then you
physically taken away from you.
Physically, like it's no longer in your possession, then you'll need to have a photo ID. You can get a ID card as opposed to a driver's license to fill in for that, so that you have a photo ID. So one of the things we've seen a lot is people mentioning state ID card. You need a state ID card. And I would stay away from using that language because there is lack of clarity on what that means. People think that a state ID card could be from a public university or from some other kind of state institution. A photo ID in this category is defined as something that is from the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles or a registrar. So no other institution, if you have a card from them, it counts as a state ID card. It has to be from the BMV or an authorized registrar. The second category is military ID, and for the most part, this is categorized as a U.S. military ID. The reason that that's important is because there are many Ohioans who have county-issued military IDs. Those are no longer eligible for photo identification to vote. The categories under the kind of specifics under U.S. military ID, Secretary of State has said that it is a U.S. military ID card or an Ohio National Guard card or U.S. Department of Veterans ID card. And then the final category is U.S. passport or U.S. passport card. Please note, there's a lot of confusion. A lot of people have asked me, well, my passport doesn't have my address on that. It doesn't need to have your address on that. You'll be asked when you register, you have to register with your current address. And when you get there, you'll be asked about your address, but it doesn't need to be on your ID. And so you don't need to worry about that. And one other thing related to that is that in that first category, you need an unexpired ID card, but you can have an old address acceptable. And that's continuing law. That was the previous case as well. So your ID card does not necessarily need to have a current address on there.
So let's be clear, when we say photo ID, what we're talking about is those IDs, like this is to prove your identity. It is not to prove your address. When you check in to early vote or you check in to go vote on election day, you are being asked to prove your identity by giving one of these forms of ID. They will ask your address, and it's at that point that your address might be different than what is on your the card that you got from the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles, or the card that you have in terms from the military. And again, the passport is new. This is a change for the better, is that fortunately, Ohio will now allow you to prove your identity at the polls using either the passport book or the passport card.
So why is this important? Because now to vote in person, and that includes whether you vote early in person or on election day, you have to have a photo ID. And so that is the things that we just talked about. You have to have one of those things to vote in person on election day or at your Board of Elections office early in person. If you do not have a photo ID, you can vote a provisional ballot on that day, but it doesn't excuse you from having a photo ID. You will eventually need to show up at your Board of Elections office with that photo ID. If you forgot it that day, it's okay, but you at some point by the deadline need to show that photo ID. One small change in the law also, previously it said that you need to write your name in the poll book. Now it says that you need to sign your name in the poll book. And just note, again, under continuing law, this is just a clarification that they will be checking signatures one against the other, the one that you have on in their database against the one that you signed. This is something that a lot of people worry about. We completely understand that. If this is a worry that you have, we highly encourage you to reach out to us. Let us know if you feel like there's a barrier to your voting.
And I would say this, if your signature has just very much changed, maybe you registered to vote 30 years ago at your address and you haven't moved, it's okay to just fill out another registration form so that there's another signature on file. If you are registering to vote or requesting an absentee ballot and you have an injured hand, you can, I suggest you write on there with a Post-it that you have an injury that's going to make your signature challenging. But yeah, anyone who gets denied their ballot or denied their voter registration because of a signature problem, yes, please contact the league directly and we will work with you to make sure that you can have your voice heard through voting.
Thanks, Jen. So there is one exception to this. There's a religious exemption in the law for those that it is not suitable for them. It's not okay for them to have their picture taken. And they are allowed on election day to vote with the last 4 digits of their social security number. And it requires them to complete what is known now, this is a new form, the affidavit of religious objection. So 2 things you need to know about this. One, they are not necessarily required to have this on hand on election day. You may be asked to go to your Board of Elections and follow up, fill this out at your Board of Elections within the 4-day timeline, 4-day deadline period. The second thing is, please know that you cannot just show up, if you forgot your license and say, oh, I claim a religious exemption, because they are instructed to submit these affidavit of religious objection to the Secretary of State, who then checks it against the BMV database to see if you have an existing driver's license or ID. And then if it is, your vote won't be counted. So please make sure that this is something that you use very carefully. You instruct voters to use very carefully if that is something that you choose to exercise. So a lot of questions about free ID cards. Is everyone eligible for a free ID card? So the first thing that you need to know and remember is that there is a difference between an ID card and a driver's license. Vast majority of people are not going to be eligible for a driver's license for free, but everyone 17 and up is eligible for a free ID card. An ID card that is issued by the BMV is just a form of identification that proves who you are. It does nothing else. It gives you no other rights. So if that is something that you need, you are eligible to apply for that for free. Something that has been passed in this new law is that driver's licenses and ID cards that are issued after the law goes into effect will have a notation on them. For people who are non-citizens, it will say non-citizen. And so one of the things that they're doing to help in this process to kind of relieve those who will become a citizen and will then need a new card, obviously, because you don't want your card to say non-citizen when you go to vote, is that if you become a citizen in the time period in which you have a driver's license, but it is still valid, you can go apply for a new driver's license and you will receive it for free as long as you are not within 90 days of expiration. The third thing that's very important to consider, and this is, I've gotten a lot of questions about this in regards to college students, is that a person cannot hold two driver's licenses from two different states, and they cannot hold a driver's license from one state and an ID card from another state. And so you have a lot of college students, evidently, that, for example, they don't want to change their driver's license, but they do want to vote in Ohio. And they fully have the right to vote in Ohio. We'll talk more about that. But if that's the case and they want to vote in person, they have to have an ID card or a driver's license from Ohio, from the state of Ohio.
Or a passport. If they want to keep their driver's license from their home state, but they want to vote, they cannot just go get a state ID because you're not allowed to have from two different places, but they can bring a passport.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, for that clarification. And then just know that there's a lot of aspects of this free ID card and getting an ID card after April 7th that we're still waiting for clarification on, as Department of Public Safety and the registrar are still in the process of clarifying some of those things, and the new rules have not yet been published. We will provide more guidance as we receive it in terms of how exactly does a person do this? What is the process like? We just don't have those answers yet, but we'll definitely provide more information when we have it. Now I'd like to introduce my new friend, Nick Ramos, who is with Vote Riders. We're very fortunate. Vote Riders is establishing a presence in Ohio now that we need them, as they fill a very special niche of helping people get ID cards if that is something that will be difficult for them. And Nick Ramos will talk a little bit more about his organization and what they do.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Nick Ramos. I am the Wisconsin Voter ID Coalition Coordinator here in Wisconsin, and I am a proud Ohio native. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit, and we're a national organization, but we have coalition coordinators like myself in states all across the country that have strict photo ID laws. And so, as Naza correctly stated, like, we are hiring out there in Ohio. I'll put this link in the chat. The goal is to truly like have somebody. I wish it was me, because I still have the 216 in my area code, and I miss Ohio dearly. But we're gonna have somebody full-time on the ground there, offering the tools and the services that I'm gonna describe here in a moment. And so if you know anybody that's interested in, joining the boat riders team and being Nick Ramos on the ground in Ohio, definitely holler at me. And I shared the link with all of you. But big thing is that at Boat Riders, we help people navigate these strict photo ID law states by helping them get their ID and then helping them get underlying documents that they would need to get an ID in the first place. So in Wisconsin, oftentimes that's a birth certificate, social security card, and then there's wiggle room for other things, but those are like, the greatest hits as far as like underlying documents. And so how does Boat Riders go ahead and like get people their documents, and what does that even look like? So we do what we call voter ID clinics. And I think when whoever is the full-time person that gets established in Ohio starts building relationships with all of you and starts building out a volunteer team and whatnot, we work with organizations all across our states that we serve in. And we work with the people in the orgs that we believe, they're serving a population that truly needs, assistance with this type of stuff. And so we go sit down, we do intake, we ask, questions and get a sense of just like what documents they already have in their possession. And then we get to work. I mean, we order people's IDs, we pay for their IDs right there on the spot. If it's a duplicate, as far as like a driver's license, like we're not paying for people to like go to get driver's ed and stuff like that. But like if you've had a driver's license like with the BMV in Ohio and you need to get a duplicate because yours is expired or you lost it, we will pay the fees for that. We will pay for someone's birth certificate anywhere in the 50 states and in the U.S. territories. And social security cards are free, but like, it can be such a drag to try and like go online and help somebody verify their person on the Social Security Administration website. So a lot of times, like, not only do we pay for the fees, but we pay for the transportation to these facilities. And so if there's somebody that needs help getting there, we'll pay for whatever it is. And even if it's somebody that, might have certain disabilities and can't, get into like a regular car, we will go ahead and order that for them. And so voter ID clinics, that's definitely coming soon to you, Ohio. I can tell you that for sure. Another thing is that because not a lot of people like know who we are, like, regular civilians and things like that, we want the world to know that like, hey, if you ever like lose your ID, need assistance getting any of these documents, you know who to call, and it's not the Ghostbusters, it's Boat Riders. And so we have these voter ID info cards that we distribute out to organizations. They're free for C3s. I put it in the chat. You can order tons of them. They're real awesome documents. I mean, it's a little wallet sized card. On the front, it gives you our contact information. On the back, it explains for every state in this country what your ID law is for going to vote. And so, if you know any C3 orgs out there in Ohio that want to get cards shipped to them, again, you can order tons of them, English and in Spanish. And then like, I'll make sure at the end to give you my email, because if there's a language that you're looking to get, we always make custom orders, and we have other languages, but the greatest hits on, our info cards are usually English and Spanish. So info card, yeah, go on in.
The other thing, I just want to let local leagues and partners know, we have something called Voting 123, which is everything you need to know to vote on a card. We will get, and we put those in 9 or 10 languages. Just like we put the election protection hotlines in there, we will put vote rider information on the new card that we are developing now.
Hey, not all heroes wear capes, Jen, man. We appreciate you. All right, very cool. The next big thing that I want to talk about, and again, I don't want to ramble on too much, so I'm starting to speed this up a little bit. So we do a lot of trainings, and there's 2 sets of trainings. The first is kind of, and it's in essence, literally what you guys are doing here today, which I think is just sick. So, it's talking about the state laws and talking about the photo ID law and talking about, how, it all is put together and then like how to vote in a state. So I don't really need to talk about that. I'll hook it up in a second, Angela. I'm going to give all you guys my contact information because you guys are all becoming some of my closest and best friends now out there in Ohio. The other training that I'm going to talk about that I think is going to be really intimate and like important to what you all are working on is specifically like the buddy trainings that we do. So like I highlighted, you know, the voter ID clinics that we do. If you or you know individuals that are interested in like being able to do this kind of work, like, you know, being able to like order documents and not have to pay for it yourself, then like I suggest filling out this form that I just put in the chat. Um, it's just a quick, simple form. If anybody has any issues accessing it, let me know. I was trying to shorten the link and it wouldn't let me, so then I just went with the long link. You know, it's a great way to learn how to order all these documents and become proficient in it. And then, you know, for those individuals that do it on a consistent basis and are working with, you know, people constantly and trying to just order these documents, you know, my organization will issue out like a corporate card for these purchases so that you can go ahead instead of having to hold on to receipts, get reimbursed, do all that stuff. I mean, it's not a tedious process, but I mean, I'd rather spend other people's money than spend my money. Um, so yeah, definitely sign up for buddy trainings. Once I get my arms around, you know, how many people are actually interested in Ohio, then we're going to start rolling those out. Um, and then the last thing that I'll just mention, and then I'll conclude. I think something long term that I think we're going to do is once we start to get a sense of like, you know, start getting lists of voters out there in Ohio that are like impacted by this law that need ID help. You know, we just got done doing a letter writing party here in Wisconsin. They're very effective. I mean, we've been able to send out tens of thousands of letters to people that we suspect on lists that we've cut might not have a valid ID. And believe me when I tell you, like, it's, you know, it's like, it's cool that they say it's simple, like, oh, you just need you need a state of Ohio ID card or a state of Ohio driver's license. But it's like, man, you know, for the longest time, people got used to being able to use other stuff. And like that transition can be so harsh for so many people. So, like, these letters that we send out to people, you know, it's a nice, clean one pager, and then we'd be able to put a personal touch to it. Just so people are just thinking about this stuff, you know, life gets busy. And so we just, not only with the letter writing parties, you know, we try and like get people's attention, but we do text banks and a variety of other community events. And so I say all that to say this, man, like, I cannot thank you all enough for you just taking the time on a Monday of all days, you know, getting all this education and all this awesome info about this stuff. I'm sorry that you're going through it, but believe me when I tell you, like, we're in this fight together, and I'm going to be traveling to Ohio as much as I possibly can, even when they hire somebody new. Because I mean, my heart has been in Ohio since the day I was born, man. So I put my contact information in there. If anybody has any questions at all, please, you can text me, you can call me, you can email me, you can carrier pigeon me. I don't care. Holler at me. I want to be as supportive as possible to you all in this kind of really weird time for Ohio. Thank you so much, and I will pass it back to our lovely host.
So I think we have a few things. Now we have your contact information. Yes, we will be sharing these slides. We're going to clarify them a little bit. Nick, what's the buddy training again? Help people understand that.
Yeah, so buddy trainings, it's basically just an intimate session of volunteers like myself, and then like we have a national volunteer trainer by the name of Pam Pearson. We do it virtually and in person, but most likely it's virtually. We go through the process for, you know, an individual, like, so we would do specifically in Ohio buddy training where individuals can go ahead and walk through how one would do, like how one would deal with a client trying to get an ID in the first place. So we do like mock scenarios that you might see in the field. And then we would actually go down the rabbit hole and like order like that document with that individual and show people how it's done. And then like we then show you like how we go ahead and order birth certificates, either through Vital Check or through, you know, whatever the municipality that, you know, the individual is born and raised in. And we go through that process. And then we show people like what it takes to get a social security card and like our procedures. And then once people are trained in doing that and they want like, you know, to go out in the field and be able to go ahead and order documents and stuff, then we'll show them like our recording, like how we record that information into our on our software, so that like we can track that individual's progress and make sure that they're getting their documents, and then and moving on to the next thing. So buddy trainings are a really great way if you want to really like get your hands deep into like this stuff and work on it and be able to help people.
So, all right, we will be sending out these slides. You will get these links. I think we'll probably be putting this recording up on our YouTube page. And we will definitely have more fun times with Nick and Vote Writers. We will be, I'm sure, having you on many panels, and we will be recruiting our volunteers to support you. So let us turn it back over to Nazik.
Thanks so much, Jen. So the major thing that's changed is that the 6 hours of voting on the Monday before Election Day have been taken away, and they have been redistributed to the week before. So this schedule, this calendar shows you the early voting schedule for the May 2nd primary, if you have an election in May in your county or in your area. And if you'll notice, the first 3 weeks of early voting are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays. And then the last week, it's where there's alternation between days as they have tried to redistribute those 6 hours throughout the week. So it alternates closing on 7:30, 8:30, and then the weekend hours. And there's only one set of weekend hours in this primary, and that differs sometimes between, depending on what the calendar looks like. So sometimes we have 2 weekends, sometimes we have 1 weekend. In this upcoming primary, it's going to be 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Please remember also that early voting requires a form of photo ID. So those 3 categories that we talked about before. So provisional ballots. A provisional ballot is used to record a vote when your eligibility to vote is in question. Nobody should be turned away from the polls if somebody questions your eligibility to vote. They should give you the option to vote a provisional ballot. So one of the things, unfortunately, that we are expecting is that there will be a big increase in provisional ballots, because there might be just a lot of people showing up at the polls who don't know about these laws, despite our best efforts. And so they will be told, oh, your utility bill or your phone bill or whatever, or your county ID, your county military ID, that unfortunately might be a big one, is not acceptable. You can vote a provisional ballot. So again, know that this still requires a photo ID, those 3 categories that we talked about before. One of the very big changes, and this is an important one, is that you only have 4 days to cure that provisional ballot. So that means that you need to show up within 4 days to your Board of Elections and give them whatever it is they ask of you to make sure that your vote is counted. And for different people, that's going to be different things. So there's a lot of reasons that a person might be asked to fill out a provisional ballot. It might have nothing to do with their ID per se. It might be that they didn't update their name change when they got married, or something like that. And so when you fill out a provisional ballot, you should instruct voters that they should not leave before they receive follow-up instructions, and they will be told whatever it is that they need to show up at the BOE with, but you only have 4 days to do it. If you look at the current calendar, BOEs are not open, boards of elections are not open on a Saturday, but we have received word that that schedule will be updated and that the Board of Elections will indeed be open on that Saturday to cure provisional ballots and absentee ballots as needed.
And Nazik, you say 4 days to cure a ballot, but you mean 4 days after Election Day. So it's possible that someone showed up in the early vote calendar, right away, right? And got a provisional ballot. They still have 4 days till after the election to cure that ballot.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Jen. So this is 4 days after Election Day to cure a ballot. So if you voted a provisional ballot on Election Day, then you have 4 days from Election Day, which turns out to be that Saturday. But you do have until the Saturday after Election Day to provide any material that the Board of Elections requests from you. So voters with disabilities are especially affected by these new laws in ways that are really even more prohibitive and difficult than most voters. We want you to know, first of all, that the ACLU of Ohio has sent a letter to Secretary LaRose that raises questions and requests clarity about certain provisions in the new laws. And they maintain that until some relief and some clarity is provided, that the new laws do conflict with Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. If we receive any further guidance on things that change, we will definitely let you know. But for now, here's what we do know. The current law states that curbside voting is only available for voters who are physically unable to enter the polling place. Now, that can still mean a number of things, but it does restrict curbside voting more than it was before, right? So the important thing to note is, however, that the Secretary of State has offered guidance saying that if you show up to vote curbside, that claim cannot be contested by an elections official. And so that is not something that you should have to deal with. If it is, please, when you go vote, always make sure that you have our number on hand, and we'll be sure to do everything we can to make sure that you can cast your ballot however you need to cast your ballot.
So just let's play this out. Let's say that you drive up to the your polling location or to the early vote center, and you say, I need to vote curbside because of a disability. A poll worker cannot say to you, you don't look disabled, right? They need to say, okay, here's your ballot.
Yeah.
Thank you. The other thing that what we're saying here is that part of the reason why it's more prohibitive is individuals with disabilities are also less likely potentially to have a driver's license or state ID. So with any kind of voter that you think they're struggling to access their right to vote, and please let us know so that we can try to assist in any way possible.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That's exactly correct. One of the major problems that we already had with curbside voting is that, especially on election day, oftentimes people roll up to their polling place. They don't necessarily see anything on the outside that lets them know about curbside voting if they did not already know about it. There isn't clear signage about how to access curbside voting. And so there was already problems with this process. I have seen that at boards of elections for early voting, in which curbside voting is also available at early voting, signage can potentially be better and directions can be better. And so on, whether it be on election day or early voting, if you say, I am physically unable to enter the polling place, no election official can contest that. So vote by mail, major changes to vote by mail. Here are—
This can also be called voting absentee.
Yes.
When we say, but we mean when you are voting, even if you're going to drop in, even if you're going to take your ballot, your completed ballot personally to the ballot box and you're not putting it in the mail, what we really mean is that the ballot will be mailed to you and that you can fill that out in the comfort of your home or whatever space you want to do that in.
Yeah, great point, Jen. Thank you. So actually, in Ohio, absentee voting is two kinds of voting. It's two categories of voting, and it is defined as written exactly in the election official manual. It is called early in-person voting or vote by mail, but both those things are absentee voting. And so there's lots of things to know about this, but we're going to try to focus on the changes and mention some of the other things that are important to know as well. One of the major changes is that you must use an official request form, a ballot request form to vote by mail that is prescribed by the Secretary of State. So if you've been doing this for a while, or if you've previously voted by mail, you might know that actually there was several ways that you could request a absentee ballot by mail, but now you have to have done it on the form that is prescribed by the Secretary of State's office. The second thing is that the deadline to submit your application to vote by mail has changed. It is now 7 days before Election Day. So if you count that out, that happens to be the Tuesday before Election Day. And then the other deadline that has changed is the deadline for the ballot to be received by your Board of Election. And that is 4 days after Election Day. And that is the Saturday after Election Day. So as mentioned before, they are open to, boards of elections will be open on that day.
And let's be clear real quick, Nazik, the deadline for submitting your ballot, it needs to be postmarked the day before Election Day, and not all mail is postmarked. So you want to take that into a post office and ask them to stamp that. And then there's 4 days for that to arrive by mail. Please know that we don't, if you want to mail your ballot backs, we do not suggest waiting until the day before Election Day to put it well in advance, because it gives 4 days. If you are hand delivering your absentee ballot, your vote by mail ballot, if you're hand delivering, you can get that into the drop box by 7:30 on Election Day. Or walk it into the Board of Elections by 7:30 on Election Day. It cannot go to your polling location. It has to go directly to the Board of Elections. So that 4 days after, what's important about that as we help voters is that is 6 days reduction of mail time. So what that really means is the deadline for the voter is they need to get it in the mail and have it postmarked the day before, or they need to get it to the Board of Elections personally on Election Day by close of polls. But if they're mailing, it gives the US Postal Service much less time for those ballots to get there.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. And I really want to stress that the deadline to postmark your ballot has not changed. It is the day before Election Day. But let's talk about what postmark means first, because people use the post office less and less these days. Postmark does not mean I put a stamp on it. Postmark means you have to walk into your post office and a human that works at the post office has to stamp the ballot, right? And in that way, they will know exactly the time and the day that it was postmarked. Otherwise, if you just put a stamp and you mail it, it needs to be received by Election Day, by close of polls on Election Day. Or as Jen mentioned, you can actually drop it off there in person in a drop box or inside the building. So vote by mail. Although these changes make it more difficult to vote by mail, this is still a best option for many voters that is secure and reliable, because it is the only way that you can still vote without a photo ID. So you can use a photo ID, you can use submit, a copy of your passport, for example, or you can use your driver's license or state ID number. But if you don't have one, that's okay. You can still use the last 4 digits of your social security number to apply to vote by mail and to submit your vote by mail ballot. This is particularly helpful for target populations who don't have a valid Ohio photo ID, don't otherwise need one, or would find it particularly difficult to get one. And there are a lot of people like that. We have heard from many of our voter service folks that they are particularly worried about college students and people who are elderly, who don't get out much, don't drive, or might be living in a senior facility, or otherwise couldn't find voters, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we will be doing a lot more work to make sure that more Ohioans know that they have choices to vote. And now that the 2 different ways to vote, absentee, by mail, and early in person, that those have different ID requirements. So we really encourage you to give more attention to vote by mail, because this will be very helpful to a lot of people. But there's things that we should review and know best practices, and some things that we should keep in mind. We will be working to produce materials for distribution, print materials, hopefully by this general election, in addition to our voting 1, 2, 3 cards, which we do every year, that will hopefully kind of stress the vote by mail process. That might be particularly helpful to have on hand in certain environments, like in senior citizen homes or on college campuses. But in the meantime, we'd like you to keep some of these considerations in mind. So one, just like we do voter registration drives, it can be very helpful in some communities to do vote by mail drives. So you can get a large number of applications from your Board of Elections office and have them out on a table, just like you do voter registration drive. Encourage people to fill them out, and you can return a bunch of them to the Board of Elections on behalf of other people, if you are able to do that.
And yeah, Nazik, I have personally done this. I think it's really fun. You know, a lot of senior citizen communities, for example, their staff will help folks fill out those vote by mail applications, but sometimes they can't. And so, you know, you can actually call, especially those facilities maybe that serve voters who are seniors or have disabilities, and ask that you can come in and help folks request their vote by mail ballots.
Great. And then if you for some reason are just not able to stick around and help people fill out those ballots, make sure that they're being the ballot applications, and make sure that they're being filled out properly. Make sure that people understand more how this process works, that it needs to be sent to their Board of Elections. There's a due date. They still have to make time to get their ballot back. And so make sure that they are educated on the entire process. When you are not there, maybe leave some guidance, even if it's just a poster, and we'll definitely be doing more work on providing some of those materials. But if you're doing this in the very near future and we just don't have those out yet, please make sure that you're not taking for granted the information that people have or don't have about how to vote by mail. Number 2, please stress urgency in the timeline. The vote by mail timeline has been compacted. As Jen said, we lost about a week in the amount of time that a ballot has to be sent in the mail. And so you can apply to vote by mail up to 90 days in advance of an election. Start doing that work 3 months ahead of time. Get those applications out there, and then let people know as soon as you receive that ballot, get it back in the mail. I suggest very much do not tell people unless they ask about the postmark deadline, because a lot of people, if they postmark something the day before election day, it is not necessarily going to get there by that Saturday, and their vote will be thrown out. That 5 days is not enough time in all parts of Ohio for one piece of mail to get even literally down the street. And so please stress urgency in the timeline. Make sure people exercise, if they exercise this option, that they do so as soon as possible. The other thing is, please highlight the Dropbox option so people don't need to send their ballot necessarily back in the mail. Again, Jen mentioned, like, it's called vote by mail, and so that can be confusing. You can actually take it back in person to your Board of Elections, or drop it in the Dropbox at the Board of Elections. You cannot take it to your polling place on election day. They will not accept it. We've seen people really frustrated about this. Again, this is a great option, but definitely some education needs to be had around this process, which we'll be working on in the next year to 2 years to increase awareness about how this works. Jen?
The Dropboxes are 24/7. They're open 24/7. So you can use the Dropbox to submit your absentee vote by mail ballot request. And you can also use it to submit your ballot, as long as it's there by the end of business day, or end of polling location close, 7:30 on election day.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about Dropboxes in a minute, because there's a few things that we need to know a little bit more about that. Major thing, though, also to keep in in mind about vote by mail is that if you're doing a vote by mail drive, you cannot distribute stamps to people. That is a thing of value, and it is not allowed for us to be distributing stamps. And the other thing is you cannot return ballots for non-family members. And so we'll go over what that is. It's a long list. I'll read it off here. So it is your father, mother, father-in-law, mother-in-law, grandfather, grandmother, brother or sister, daughter, adopted parents or adopted children, step-parents or stepchildren, uncle, aunt, nephew, or niece. So that is the list of what is a family member. And if you have any questions about that, of course, you can reach out to us, but you cannot return ballots to the BOE on behalf of anybody else.
And in terms of stamps, some nonprofits may decide to take that risk on to hand out stamps, but you could be subject to prosecution from the Attorney General or your county prosecutor. So this is why we tell you not to distribute stamps. Some leagues sell stamps for cost, and that is okay.
A few more things that we should know about drop boxes. So in the law, it is now specified that a Board of Elections can only have one drop box per county. This was the guidance from the Secretary of State's office. It is unfortunate because boards of elections, many of them do want to have more than one drop box per county, but now it has been codified that they can only have one per county. And if they happen to have more than one location, like more than one office in the county, they have to pick one of those offices and the drop box can only be at one of them. I'm not aware of any BOEs that have more than one office, but if you know that your BOE does, make sure you know exactly where their drop box is. Drop boxes are open 24/7 during the early vote period, and they are open until the close of polls on election day. And if you are in line, whether it be in line inside or in line at the drop box, so maybe there's like a drive-up line or something, you must be allowed to stay in line to submit your ballot until you submit your ballot, as long as you are in line by 7:30.
And a few other things, just to remind everyone, these drop boxes on average weigh 600 pounds. They're bolted to the ground. They have 24/7 video surveillance. They are fire and weatherproof. And so if anyone has a concern about a drop box, you can alleviate that concern by telling these things, as well as that they are emptied by at least one Democrat and one Republican. So there's fairness all around the drop boxes. The unfair part is that there's only one per county, but they are a very trustworthy way of getting, whether it's your registration form, your vote by mail application, or the ballot itself back into the Board of Elections.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jen. And there's actually even increased security around drop boxes in the new laws, in which they either need to be live streamed 24/7 during the early vote period, or they have to be recorded and then downloaded every day, the recording, and available if there's a public records request for them. So it's a very secure way to vote. And it is very helpful to let people know that, because, some people just might not feel very secure about that. So it's helpful in educating about this process, that it is a very secure way to cast your ballot. So we want to spend a little bit of time before we're done talking about some specific communities that will be especially affected by this bill, but know that we will be doing more trainings to spend more time kind of taking a deep dive into how to help these communities. This is just really like an overview of some things that we should remember. So when dealing with college students who are going to be really affected by this law, because many of them don't have Ohio photo IDs, but they do like to exercise their right to vote in the state of Ohio. College students have, first of all, they have a choice as to where their residency is for voting purposes. If they want to, they can choose home to be their parents' home, like where they came from, or they can choose where they live on campus at their college to be their residency for voting purposes. And so depending on that choice, that is going to determine where they cast their ballot, whether it be in person or through the mail, because even in Ohio, it might be different counties. The second thing is to remember that college students are oftentimes, they are folks who are moving every year. And so it's important to remind them that every time they move, they need to update their voter registration status. They don't necessarily need to update their actual photo ID, right? Because if there's an expiration date on, like, it has to be current, unexpired, but it's okay if there's an old address on there. But their voter registration status, they do have to update that every time they move. And then the third thing is remind college students, let them know that they have options on how to vote. They can vote early in person or on election day or by mail. And I think a lot of times older individuals don't necessarily remember that when they were college students, they didn't have the same level of education. We find regularly that college students don't know very much about the voting process, and that any of these things, that they can choose their residency, that they have to update their registration status regularly, and that they have options on how to vote. So these three things are, I would say, the three most important points that I see regularly college voters are confused by. Confined voters. So there are some categories of voters that are going to be confined to a space. That most of the time that means voters who are still eligible to vote, but they are they have been convicted of a misdemeanor crime, or they are being held in a jail awaiting trial, but they are still eligible to vote, but they can't obviously go to a polling place. Another category oftentimes is people who are in a senior citizen home or a nursing home, and they can't necessarily get out to go to a polling place. They have an additional way that they can vote, where they can request the assistance of two elections officials from two different political parties to come and help them cast their ballot. So they will bring the ballot, they will administer the ballot to you, and then they will collect it, and that your vote will have counted. It's important to know that if you exercise your right to vote in this way, that carries the status of vote by mail. And that's important because you don't need a photo ID. So these folks, you can use the last 4 digits of your social security number if that's the easiest way for you to cast your ballot. So real quickly, this is an overview of what the May 2nd election schedule will look like. Pay attention to the things that are the text that is bolded red. Those are the things that have changed on the election schedule. This changes obviously every year, but this, not every year, but every election season. And we will publish another one for the general election, but this is what we're looking at for the May 2nd election if you have one in your area. Finally, I want to close out by saying I've gotten a lot of concerns and questions about what we're doing, what the Secretary of State's doing, what boards of elections are doing. I want you to know, first of all, that our advocacy continues. I always say we have 2 buckets of work. One is voter education and one is advocacy. And we will continue every day to advocate to make sure that Ohioans can cast their ballot with ease and efficiency, that everybody can do that. On that note, I want to remind everybody that on March 9th, we will have our State House Day, and you showing up on State House Day and at the State House to meet your legislators that day goes a long way to let legislators know that these issues matter to you. The next thing I want to mention is that boards of elections have had a lot of things that they are now forced to be doing new, but they have not yet received any funding for any of this. There is no voter education funding in the governor's budget that was suggested. We don't see any voter education funding anywhere else yet, whether it be on the county level or on the state level, although we will continue to advocate for this. And so that's important to keep in mind, that many of you who live in smaller areas, although the Secretary of State is asking them to undergo like a rigorous public information campaign, their capacity to do so is limited. But we are working ourselves and with many other nonprofits and our local leagues all around the state to make sure that this is priority number one right now, to make sure that every Ohio voter knows how to cast their ballot and that they can make it count. And so we invite you to make sure that you are following up with us on a regular basis, following our social media, coming to these public webinars so that you know what's going on and you can help us get this information out on the ground. Finally, I want to say thank you to all of you for being here today, for taking the time to work through all of this with us. This is a conversation that will continue. There's a lot of information here today. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us. There's my information, there's the office information, and you can reach out to ask questions anytime, but make sure if you are a member or you are signed up to any of our social media channels to keep taking a look at those, as we will be publicizing more opportunities to learn and to train on these new voter laws.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen.